You open your eyes. It's 20,000 BC, and nobody woke you up. There is no alarm. There is no boss. There is no Monday because there is no week. Last night's fire is still smoking a little. Someone is already awake, poking at it with a stick. A few people are still asleep under hides. And here's the strange part. You have absolutely nothing scheduled. Not one single thing. No emails, no shift, no commute, no meeting. And yet by tonight, roughly 40,000 calories have to come from somewhere to feed this camp. Nobody assigned that job to anybody. Nobody is going to. Somehow it gets done anyway, the way it got done yesterday. So what exactly did people do all day? That's the real question. What did ancient humans do with 12, 14, 16 hours of daylight when there was no job to go to? Because think about it for a second. Your day has structure handed to you for free. Someone tells you when to arrive, what to produce, and when you're allowed to leave. Take all of that away, and most modern people come apart within about a week. We know this because we've tested it. Every lockdown, every long stretch of unemployment, the same pattern shows up. Humans without structure get restless, then bored, then genuinely miserable. But foragers ran that experiment for roughly 300,000 years and did not come apart. They built art, music, language, medicine, and trade networks stretching hundreds of kilometers across a desert. With no calendar, no manager, no to-do list. You'd think that would be paradise. It wasn't exactly. And it wasn't chaos either. Here's the thing nobody tells you. The answer is not. They relaxed. And it's not they struggled to survive. Both of those are cartoons drawn by people who never checked. The truth is that ancient humans were busy for almost the entire day. They were just busy with things we no longer bother to count as work. It's not one thing. It's never one thing. There are 6 layers here, and we're going from the simple stuff up to one finding from 2017 that will change how you think about a normal night's sleep. Let's go. Start with the number that started the entire argument. In 1963, a young anthropologist named Richard Lee moved in with the Zhu, a foraging people living in the Kalahari Desert, and did something almost nobody had bothered to do before. He timed them. Every single day, for 4 weeks, he recorded who left camp, where they went, and exactly how long they were gone. The result, published in 1968, embarrassed a lot of people. Zhu men spent about 21.5 hours a week getting food. The women spent about 12.5, averaged across the whole camp. That's roughly 17 hours a week. A bit over 2 hours a day, in a desert, in one of the harshest places human beings have ever chosen to live on purpose. Take a second with that. The entire story you were told, that ancient life was a desperate scramble for calories from dawn until dark, collapsed under a stopwatch. And the Kalahari was not a fluke. Among the Hadza in northern Tanzania, early estimates from James Woodburn put the time spent actually acquiring food at under 2 hours a day, averaged across the whole year. Those figures were part of what convinced the anthropologist Marshall Salins to call foragers the original affluent society, not because they owned much, because they wanted little and got it fast. So if your mental image of an ancient human is a permanently starving creature clawing at scraps, delete it. On a decent day, a Juhan woman walked out, dug up some mongongo nuts, walked home, and was finished before lunch. Those mongongo nuts were so abundant that Lee recorded a Juhuan man answering the question of why his people had never taken up farming with one line. Why should we plant, he said, when there are so many mongongos in the world? That's the easy layer. Food took 2 to 3 hours, which leaves a very large problem. There are still 14 hours of daylight sitting there unaccounted for. And this is exactly where most documentaries quietly change the subject. Because the honest answer is that not working turned out to be extremely busy. So what filled the rest of it? Start with the least glamorous answer possible. Here's what nobody tells you about that famous 17-hour figure. It measured exactly one thing, leaving camp to acquire food. It did not measure a single thing that happened after the food came back. Lee knew that. So in 1979, he went back to his own data and recalculated, this time counting food processing, tool manufacture, tool repair, and general housework. The number moved from around 17 hours a week to roughly 40. 40, which, if you're keeping score, is the same as your job. Think about what that work actually involves. A mongongo nut has A shell hard enough that you crack it with a stone. One nut at a time, hundreds of times. An antelope skin does not become a bag by wishing at it. It has to be scraped clean, stretched, worked with fat, dried, cut, and then sewn with sinew you prepared yourself. A hunting arrow needs a shaft straightened over heat, a point, glue, binding, and poison made from beetle larvae that somebody has to dig out of the ground. And the poison degrades, so it gets reapplied. An ostrich eggshell water container has to be found, drained, cleaned, engraved, and stoppered. The ostrich eggshell beads archaeologists keep finding across southern Africa take a genuinely absurd amount of grinding per bead, and a single necklace is hundreds of them. None of this looks like work in a photograph. It looks like a group of people sitting around a fire, chatting, hands quietly moving. That is exactly what it was, and that is the entire point. Here is the uncomfortable version. Most of the famous leisure time was manufacturing. Ancient humans were sitting in the longest-running workshop in history. And the workshop was also the living room, and the living room was also the office. And nobody ever clocked out of any of the three. One more detail that lands. Because everything you owned you also had to carry, foragers kept possessions to a bare minimum. A Jew Huan adult's entire personal property could be carried in a single trip. But minimal possessions do not mean minimal work. They mean constant work because things wear out fast and get rebuilt from scratch. Out of raw materials, you have to go and find first. So the day looks like this so far. 2 to 3 hours acquiring food, then several more. Hours of skilled handwork, in company, by a fire. But there's a piece of the day we haven't measured at all yet. And your body would notice this one immediately. Here's a number that should worry you slightly. A research team led by Herman Ponzer strapped GPS units and heart rate monitors onto Hadza adults in Tanzania and measured what they physically did. The average Hadza adult logged around 2 hours and 14 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity every single day, per day. The current public health guideline for adults in most countries is 150 minutes per week. The Hadza were clearing that sometime on Tuesday morning. Hadza men walked roughly 11 kilometers a day, women around 6. Not on a treadmill, and not as exercise, because the concept of exercise does not exist there. It is simply how you get to the food and back again. Then Ponzer's team measured total daily energy expenditure using doubly labeled water, which is the gold standard for this, and the result was the strange bit. Hadza adults burned roughly the same number of calories per day as adults in the United States and Europe once you adjust for body size. Same energy budget, radically different lives, which tells you something odd about the human body. It seems to hold total daily energy fairly steady and simply spend it on different things. But that is a whole other video. For today, the point is much simpler. A large chunk of the answer to what did they do all day is just this. They moved. Walking out to a foraging patch. Walking further because the good patch had already been picked clean. Carrying 15 kilos of nuts and a toddler on the way back. Climbing a baobab tree with pegs hammered into the trunk. Following a honey guide, an actual wild bird that leads human beings to bee nests and has been doing it for a very long time. There was no gym because there was no need for a gym. And there was no need for a gym because the entire day was one. And this is also why the "they only worked" 2 hours line is misleading in the other direction. 2 hours of foraging in the Kalahari is not 2 hours at a desk. It is 2 hours of digging into hard ground with a sharpened stick in 40-degree heat, followed by a long walk home under load. Now the talking. And this one genuinely surprised the researcher who measured it. Across several decades, Polly Wiesner recorded and translated conversations among the Jew Honsi, 174 of them, daytime and nighttime, plus 68 older translated texts. Then she sorted what people talked about by the time of day they talked about it. Daytime conversation was overwhelmingly practical and political. Economic matters, land, who did what and who didn't, and complaint. An enormous amount of complaint, criticism, joking insults, arguments about sharing. If you were picturing ancient camp life as serene, it wasn't. A large share of daytime talk was complaint and conflict management. That sounds petty. It absolutely is not. In a group with no police, no courts, and no boss, complaining is the legal system. Public criticism is how you stop somebody from hoarding meat. Mockery is how you stop a good hunter from turning himself into a chief. The Zhuangzi have a famous custom sometimes called insulting the meat. When a hunter drags a large animal back to camp, everybody tells him it's pathetic, scrawny, barely worth the walk. He agrees with them enthusiastically. And nobody in that camp ever gets to be important. That is a full-time political job, and every adult in camp worked it. Then the sun goes down, and the subject changes completely. Wiesner found that the overwhelming majority of firelit conversation, something like 8 out of every 10 conversations, was stories. Not economics, not complaint. Stories about specific named people, distant relatives, ancestors, long journeys, spirits. Things that happened 4 camps away. Things that happened generations ago. Day talk regulated the group you could see. Night talk built the world you couldn't. And that's not a metaphor. That's the actual finding. Firelight talk carried real information about real people hundreds of kilometers away, inside networks you might one day need to survive. Also, yes, one of the most consistent findings in all of forager research is that the single most reliable evening activity across the entire planet, for the whole history of our species, was gossip. We didn't invent it, we inherited it. Which sounds abstract until you look at what those networks were actually for. Here's the part that reframes the whole question, because a huge amount of the year wasn't spent in camp at all. Among the Zhuangzi, there's a system called xaro. It's a gift partnership. You give somebody an object, a knife, a bead necklace, an arrow, a piece of clothing. It isn't a trade. There's no price, no haggling, and no immediate return. Months or years later, they give you something back. The object is almost beside the point. The relationship is the actual product. Wiesner documented individuals maintaining roughly 10 to 12 active xaro partners each. Some of those partners lived up to 200 kilometers away. Some partnerships were inherited across generations, handed down like an address book. And here's what they were really for. When your area failed, and it did fail, through drought or a bad season or a water hole, drying up, you did not sit there and starve. You walked. You turned up at your partner's camp, and you had a genuine right to be fed there, because 30 years of small gifts said so. Wiesner's survey of 20 Zhuang adults found the average person made about 1 and a half extended visits per year, and the average visit lasted around 2 months. Read that again. 2 months per visit. So a serious chunk of an ancient human's year was this. Walking to see people, being a guest, being visited. Maintaining a distributed insurance network built entirely out of presence and conversation. We call that socializing, and we treat it as the opposite of work. For them, it was the single most important economic activity they performed. A savings account you could not lose, stored inside other people. Think about that for a second. Your emergency fund was your friends. And it explains something about us. Humans are the only ape that routinely hangs around with unrelated individuals from other groups without it turning into violence. For a chimpanzee, meeting a neighboring group is usually a very bad afternoon. For us, it's a visit. Now, the group we haven't accounted for at all. What did the children do all day in a world with no school? The short answer is that they foraged, and they were startlingly good at it. There's a study of Hadza children and juveniles aged 5 to 14, built from around 15,000 hourly camp observations of 76 kids, plus direct follows on individual children out of camp. Older children spent more time on economic activity. Girls did more work inside camp. Boys did more of it outside. And when researchers followed children on actual foraging trips, instead of only weighing what they carried home, the numbers were startling. Children netted between 3 and 5.4 calories for every single calorie they burned foraging. On some days, a child brought in more calories than an adult needs. They just ate a great deal of it on the spot, which, if you have ever taken a 7-year-old berry picking, is the least surprising sentence in this entire video. But look at what that actually means. A Hadza child is not a dependent sitting around waiting to become useful. A Hadza child is a small, semi-independent economic unit with a digging stick, learning the job by doing the job, all day, in a mixed-age gang, largely unsupervised. There's no classroom, because the classroom is the landscape. There's no curriculum, because the curriculum is watch the adults, copy them badly, get corrected by an 11-year-old, try again tomorrow. Researchers who study forager childhood report again and again that direct instruction is rare. Nobody sits a child down. The child follows, watches, and gets handed a sharp knife embarrassingly early by our standards. So add that to the day. Adults working, children working, and nobody in the camp calling either of those things work. Now let's be honest, because there's a version of this story that has become far too comfortable. Salin's original affluent society idea escaped the academic world and turned into a meme. Ancient humans worked 15 hours a week and spent the rest of their lives relaxing in paradise. That is not what the data says. For one, Li's own recalculation pushed the Zhu Huanzi up to around 40 hours once real work was counted properly. For another, foragers vary enormously. Kim Hill and Magdalena Hurtado spent years studying the ache of eastern Paraguay, a forest-dwelling foraging people. Akmen spent close to 7 hours a day on direct food acquisition. 7, that's a full working day in a rainforest with a bow, and then everything else stacked on top of it. Hill's conclusion was blunt. The characterization of hunter-gatherers as the original affluent society does not agree with the currently available data. Time spent working varies wildly between groups, and it isn't simply a function of how much food people need. So the honest version is this. Some foragers had a lot of free time. Some worked considerably harder than you do. The Kalahari is not the Amazon. Ancient humans were never one thing, and anybody selling you a single answer is selling you a story. There's one last thing I saved for the end, and it's the wildest part, because it's about the one part of the day you assumed was completely empty: sleep. In 2015, a team led by Gandhi Yetish fitted activity monitors to the Hadza in Tanzania, the San in Namibia, and the Simene in Bolivia. 3 groups, 2 continents, no electricity between them. If you want to know how human beings sleep without light bulbs, this is as close as we can get. They slept between 5.7 and 7.1 hours a night. The average was 6.4. They went to sleep about 3 hours after sunset, and they woke just before dawn, at the coldest point of the night. So much for the 8-hour ancestral slumber. But that isn't the twist. In 2017, a team led by David Sampson took the same kind of nighttime data from a Hadza camp. 33 adults, 20 days, around 13,000 minutes of observation. And they asked one simple question: how much of that time was every single person asleep at once? The answer was 18 minutes. 18 minutes out of 13,000. For all the rest of it, somebody in that camp was awake. On average, roughly 40% of the group was awake at any given moment during the night. And nobody organized it. There was no rota, no watch list, no volunteers. It happened because older people naturally sleep early and wake early, and younger people naturally stay up late, and the age spread of the group generated a continuous night watch entirely by accident. Here's the line: your grandmother's 5 a.m. and your teenager's 2 a.m. are not sleep disorders. They're the last 2 shifts of a guard rotation that ran for 1,000,000 years. That's the real answer to what ancient humans did all day. They never fully stopped. So come back to it. You, in 20,000 BC, waking up with absolutely nothing scheduled. By the time the sun goes down, you will have walked 8 kilometers, dug for 2 hours, cracked 100 nuts, repaired an arrow, argued with your cousin about meat, publicly insulted a perfectly good antelope, told a story about a man who lives 4 days walk away, handed someone a bead necklace you'll get nothing back for, and fallen asleep in a camp where somebody is always awake. No job, no clock, and not one empty minute in the whole day. We didn't invent work. We just invented the part where somebody else tells you when it starts.